Hi, I'm Rolf Perez with Shooter's Paradise. It looks like millions of you got firearms for Christmas. Awesome. So I want to take a moment and make a little video about safety and what we can do to be really safe with a firearm. The NRA has 3 safety rules. The first rule is always keep the gun pointed in a safe direction. The second rule is always keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. And the third rule is always keep the gun unloaded until you're ready to use it. These 3 rules will prevent accidents. We can prevent accidents. And if we always, that's the key word in these rules is always, if we always do these things, we won't have a tragedy. It's that simple. So the first thing I do when I pick up a firearm is keep it pointed in a safe direction. So here I have a firearm. Great. I'm keeping it pointed in a safe direction. What you can't see off screen is that there's a brick wall. This firearm is pointed at a brick wall that will absolutely stop any round that were to come out of this gun. The second thing I've done is I've kept my finger off the trigger. I'm not ready to shoot. My finger is not on the trigger. And then the third rule is always keep the gun unloaded until ready to use. So now I'm going to verify that third rule. So I will first release the magazine, and you can see the magazine is unloaded. There's nothing in the magazine, so I know my magazine is unloaded. Next, I'm going to verify there's nothing in the chamber. So what I'll do then is I will lock the slide back. And then I'll take my little finger and I'll stick it into the chamber. And then I'll take my little finger and I'll stick it into the mag well. That means there's no magazine in the gun and there's no round in the chamber. So I know that this firearm is unloaded. And you'll notice that what I did first when I picked the gun up was kept it pointed in a safe direction. So, the first rule, always keep the gun pointed in a safe direction. If I were to ignore the other rules, because I made a mistake, and I only followed that first rule and kept it pointed in a safe direction, there will not be a tragedy if the gun were to accidentally fire. If I were to allow my finger to go on the trigger and the gun were to fire, but I always kept it pointed in a safe direction, that one rule would save me. Then the second rule, always keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire. If, and by that we mean always keep your finger off the trigger until your sights are aligned on the target and you're in the very act of firing. So if I simply follow the second rule alone, and I were to point that gun in places I shouldn't, and I were to load the gun when it shouldn't be loaded, then that second rule would prevent a tragedy because the gun can't go off if I don't put my finger on the trigger. Guns don't fire unless we interact with the trigger on the gun. It's an amazing thing. We can prevent accidents. So just simply following the second rule alone would prevent a tragedy. Now, the gun might go off when I don't want it to with only following one of the rules, but it wouldn't be a tragedy. And the third rule is always keep the gun unloaded until you're ready to use it. So if I weren't following the first rule and the second rule, and I pointed the gun in a place I shouldn't point it, and I allowed my finger to go on the trigger when I shouldn't allow it to go on, but the gun was kept unloaded, that then would prevent a tragedy. So we have 3 rules. There are multiple layers of safety. If we follow all 3, we can prevent accidents. Guns can be very safe if we follow the rules. So the first rule is the most important rule. The number 1 rule with a firearm is always keep the gun pointed in a safe direction. That's the first thing you do when you pick up a gun. A lot of people believe the first thing you do when you pick up a firearm is to check and make sure it's unloaded. That's actually not the first thing you do. It's the third thing you do. The first thing you do when you pick up a firearm is to keep it pointed in a safe direction. And I have a brick wall over there, which is my safe direction. The second thing I do is keep my finger off the trigger. The third thing I do is verify that the firearm is unloaded. If I follow all 3 of those, I can handle firearms with an incredible confidence that there'll never be a problem. It's a wonderful thing, but I have to follow them always, always, always. never an exception to those three rules. So, what about those of us who have been handling firearms for a long time? Oh, yeah, Rolf, I got all that, but I need a gun for self-defense, so I have to keep a gun loaded. Well, I'm with you, absolutely. The third rule, always keep the gun unloaded until you're ready to use it, still applies. Because if you have a firearm staged for self-defense, like maybe in your holster, it's ready to be used at any moment. The moment you put your holster on and put the loaded firearm in the holster, it was ready to be used. And it's ready to be used all throughout the day. So that doesn't violate the third rule. It's always keep the gun unloaded until you're ready to use it. And if it's a self-defense gun, you ought to be always ready to use it. So always keep the gun pointed in a safe direction. Never point the gun at another person. Well, if it's a self-defense thing, then I need to point it at another person. Correct. Got that. I'm with you 100%. So here's the neat little thing about that. In a life and death situation, when somebody else is trying to kill me, what's the safe direction? They are. So that's one to think about too. The first rule still applies. And always keep my finger off the trigger until I'm ready to shoot. I should never touch the trigger until the gun is lined up on that target. That should be the only time I ever touch the trigger. So I'm going to incorporate a couple little pictures with the three rules. Hopefully this is helpful to you. Have a great day. Merry Christmas. Rock on, guys.